Hello everyone. I've got a double helping of poetry today. They're two versions of the same poem for reasons that will become apparent. But before I go on, can I say thank you again for all the feedback that I've been getting by messenger, by email. I had a telephone call this afternoon from my friend Dave in Hollywood. That's the one in North Worcestershire, not the one in California, saying how much he enjoys the readings and postings each day. And if just one person enjoys all this, it feels like the few minutes that I give to it each day are entirely worthwhile. But I've heard from Germany and Australia and the United States and Belgium and all sorts of other places. So it's very nice. And when this is all over, I hope that perhaps in the case of some of you, we can all meet up and have a slightly different version of this, perhaps with walks or tours or performances in a real way rather than online. That, however, it seems is somewhat for the future. So on to what I'm going to talk about today. Coming from the English Midlands and working a lot in Stratford-upon-Avon, it is unsurprising to learn that I spend an awful lot of my time talking about the life and less often the works of William Shakespeare. But actually there is an earlier English writer who, if I'm honest, has a slightly deeper place inside my heart, which is the medieval writer Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, in his lifetime, Chaucer was actually what we would now call a fairly high-ranking civil servant. And in fact, at the end of his life, when he was buried in Westminster Abbey, it wasn't because of his literary prowess. He was buried in the Abbey for the simple reason that he was very important in the royal household. Since then, other great writers and poets and artists have been buried around him, so we now have an area called Poets' Corner, but he was the founder of that, if you like. He occupied for a time a flat, as we now call it, rooms above one of the old gates in the wall of the city of London, a gate called Aldgate, which, like all the others, really only survives today in a place name, a street name. But that guarded the main road out of London into Essex, to the southern part of East Anglia, and to the once very important town of Colchester. And pretty much that was like him having an apartment today over the M1 or the M4. And he would have seen every layer of society, from the wealthiest to the poorest, passing that way. Different beliefs, different professions, different modes of dress, all of those things. And when he came to write his seminal work, The Canterbury Tales, I like to think that the different characters that he created were all based on the sorts of people that he had watched. I'm sure had he lived in the 20th century, he would probably have written a soap opera. He would have probably done Coronation Street or something. Funnily enough, the same is probably true of William Shakespeare. They were the populist writers of their day. Now, for any of you that don't know, the Canterbury Tales is an unfinished collection of stories which concern a pilgrimage made by a group of very diverse people from London to Canterbury. In the early medieval period, Canterbury was a major destination for pilgrims, not only from England actually, but from other parts of Europe. The one-time Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket, and it's not really a Becket, which is often written, but Thomas Becket, was actually killed by 3 knights who misunderstood, it's said, the instructions from the king about wanting to be rid of this troublesome priest. And just as Becket was about to celebrate High Mass, he was slaughtered, which would have been awful enough anywhere. But in front of the high altar of Canterbury Cathedral, this sent shockwaves throughout Christendom, and the king very quickly tried to do penance for that. He made a pilgrimage to Canterbury himself. A shrine was established to Becket, and pilgrims from all over England and sometimes further afield started to go there. Today, it's rather like people doing spectacular holidays or cruises. People would collect different pilgrimages. People even bought little metal badges that they could wear, just like people sometimes collect them now. So Canterbury, very, very important for that. However, This story concerns a fictitious group of pilgrims, one of which is the storyteller, so Chaucer himself, who meet one another the night before they begin their pilgrimage at a tavern in Southwark on the south bank of the River Thames, opposite the ancient city of London. And these 29 pilgrims all fought together in fellowship, and they were pilgrims all. And the narrator comes up with this idea that to pass the time, each member of the team will tell a story, one on the way out, one on the way back. And at the end, whichever one is considered to have been the best wins, I think, a slap-up meal from the landlord of the Tabard Inn in Southwark. The work was never actually completed. Chaucer seems to have doubted his own right, not ability, but right to pen such a thing, and actually partway through takes his leave of the reader. It's a very curious piece. The tales are all self-contained stories. Again, it would be like a television series with lots of different episodes or segments, as North American visitors might call them. And they're all wonderful in their own way. But the part that is really special, at least for me, is the prologue, where the writer, so Chaucer, actually describes all of the different people who are taking part in the pilgrimage, but before that actually sets the scene. So remember, we are at an ancient tavern which did exist, the Tabard, just off Southwark High Street, in an area Londoners still called the Borough, to distinguish it from the City of London on the opposite bank of the Thames. And although the Tabard no longer survives, another very ancient inn, the George, that does survive and is in the care of the National Trust now. Many of you will know that. But there we get all these people meeting together at this particular time of year. Chaucer wrote in Middle English. That's not immediately recognisable as the same as the modern English that we speak. Sometimes the differences in English in different countries around the world have arisen because people went there at a time when the English language was different to now, and words that we used here survive there. That's very apparent with North America, a little bit less so with Australia and New Zealand, although they still spell jail with a G, which was once the English way of doing it. But Middle English is rather before that. Unlike Old English or Anglo-Saxon, it's not completely impenetrable to us, but it does sound very strange. So first of all, I'm going to read the beginning of the prologue to you in my attempt at Middle English. And having done that, we'll have another listen, this time to Neville Coghill's masterful 20th century translation. So see what you all think. Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, the first part of the general prologue. When that April with his shore is soter, the drought of March hath pierced to the rooter, and bathed every vein in switch liquor, of which virtue engendered is the floor. When Zephyros eke with his sweet breath inspired in every holt and heath, the tenderer croppes and the younger sun hath in the ram his half course eron. And small fowlers make on melody that slippen all the night with open eye, so pricketh hem nature in here courageous than longen folk to goon on pilgrimages. And palmeres photo seeken stranger stronze to ferna halwes coast in sundry landes. And specially from every shire's end of England to Canterbury they wenda, the holy blissful matir for to seek that him hath holpen when that they were sick. Befill in that season on a day in Southwark at the Tabard, as I lay, ready to wenden on my pilgrimage to Canterbury with full devout courage. At night there were coming to that hostelry well 29 in our company, of sundry folk by adventure y fall, in fellowship and pilgrimes were they all, that toward Canterbury woulden ride. The chambers and stables weren wide, and well we weren essed at a best, and shortly when the sonne was to rest, so had I spoken with him every chon, that here was I fellowship anon, and made forward early for to rise, to take our way, as there I you devise. Now, if that sounds a little bit odd and weird for Old English, perhaps we can now have a look or a listen to the same thing but in modern English in the form of Neville Coghill's masterful rhyming 20th century translation. When in April the sweet showers fall and pierce the drought of March to the root and all, the veins are bathed in liquor of such power as brings about the engendering of the flower. When also Zephyrus with his sweet breath exhales an air in every grove and heath, upon the tender shoots and the young sun his half course in the sign of the ram has run. And the small fowl are making melody that sleeps away the night with open eye. So nature pricks them and their heart engages, and people long to go on pilgrimages. And palmers long to seek the stranger strands of far-off saints hallowed in sundry lands. And specially from every shire's end of England down to Canterbury they wend, to seek the holy blissful martyr quick, to give his help to them when they were sick. And it happened in that season that one day in Southwark at the Tabard as I lay, ready to go on pilgrimage and start for Canterbury, most devout at heart, at night there came into that hostelry full 29 in a company of sundry folk, happening then to fall in fellowship. And they were pilgrims all, that towards Canterbury meant to ride. The rooms and stables of the inn were wide. They made us easy, all was of the best. And briefly, when the sun had gone to rest, I'd spoken to them all upon the trip, and was soon at one with them in fellowship, pledged to rise early and to take the way to Canterbury, as you heard me say. I first read Coghill's version of the Canterbury Tales when I bought the book sometime in the late 1980s while in Canterbury. It seemed the most appropriate place to read it, and I remember doing exactly that. And the prologue and what follows are really, really wonderful, and I hope that this brief introduction today encourages you, if you've not done it before or not done it for a long time, to go and explore Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, because it's a hackneyed phrase, but there really is something in it for absolutely everyone, however broad-minded you might be. Thanks and happy reading.